Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today in what I think is a very, besides so important, a very timely conversation that we need to have. I hope that the webinar will be short. It should not take too much time. There's a few pieces of information that we need to get across to as many schools as we can. Baruch Hashem is a nice representation of many schools from New Jersey that are here. And the video is being recorded, so we'll be able to send it to you afterwards. And in case there's some schools that couldn't participate, we'll be able to send it to them as well. We're going to be having, the webinar will be split into two segments. The first segment will be discussing the EANS, which stands for the Educational Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools, which is the new federal grant from the stimulus package that many people are talking about. After that segment, we'll have a Q&A if there are any questions on that. And then we're going to be going to the second segment, which is discussing consultation. Now, we did write in the email that this is really focused on schools that have students that live in Jackson Township, New Jersey. However, if you are an administrator or a head of a school from a different town that is also having consultation issues, or you're not sure what consultation is, it may be very beneficial for you to stay on as well. You don't have to, but we will be discussing some of the regulations of consultation. It's mostly relevant for Jackson students, but it definitely is what to be gained by some other districts as well if you choose to stay on. So let's get right to it. The Aguda previously, and just one quick logistical announcement, that any questions, please put into the Q&A. There's a chat box and there's a Q&A. Please do not put any items into the chat. Please put all of your questions or comments into the Q&A. Even if it's not a question, if it's a comment, you can still put it into the Q&A and we will match and address all of the questions. Many of us, almost all of us, are aware of the federal grant that has come to New Jersey under the program called EANS, Emergency Assistance to Non-Public School. The state of New Jersey got approximately $68 million, which is obviously a huge amount of money. Of that $68 million, 1/3 of it is going to our yeshivas. So you're talking easily $22, $23, $24 million coming to yeshivas. In addition to EANS, which now we're referring to as EANS 1, in the most recent stimulus package, there was an additional $70 million that has been allocated to New Jersey. So if this time EANS 1 is $22 million, in EANS 2, you could assume will be an additional $22, $23 million. It's a total of about $45 million for yeshivas that will go directly for yeshiva services. It's a tremendous amount of money. I don't remember the last time that our yeshivas received such a lump in one shot of $45 million. The money can also be used till the end of the school year 2023. So it's not only for now, it's for next year, and it's for the following year. The Aguda has given a webinar on a lot of the allowable uses of the EANS, which many of you have seen. If you haven't seen it, it's worthwhile to go to the Aguda website, aguda.org, click in the search for EANS webinar, and you'll see the webinar there as well. That goes through all the specifics of the allowable uses, what it could be used for, what it can't be used for. That was at a very generic federal level. I want to focus today on what's relevant for New Jersey and what is happening in the state. All of you received from the state a letter that included, number one, your school's allocation. Number two, it also had an application that all the schools need to fill out. Baruch Hashem, many schools did not fill out the application yet, and we don't think the schools should fill it out yet, and I'm just going to explain why. The state has decided that, trying to say this in the best way possible, the state has decided to implement certain regulations in addition to what the federal government put into place. One of those regulations is that although the EANS money can be used for, and I'll read you straight from the legislation, for initiating and maintaining education and support services, which is Title I, Title III, Title IV, educational support services, the state has put a restriction that only public entity providers, only public entity vendors are allowed to provide those services. Meaning, if you are a school in Lakewood, we'll just pick Lakewood because there's just a lot of them. If you're a school in Lakewood and your vendor is Catapult, you are not allowed to use Catapult for any of your EANS money services. So if you have $40 million, if your school is a big school and you were allocated $2 or $3 million this time around, and you get another $2 million next time around, you have $4 million available to use for a long list of things. One of those is services, which most of our yeshivas plan and would like to use the money for. You cannot use Catapult. You cannot use TenderTouch. You cannot use Tree of Knowledge. You cannot use any vendor that is not a public entity. An example of a public entity is the Education Services Commission. There's other county in close to Lakewood, there's MOESC, which is Mammoth Ocean Educational Services Commission. You could use one of the public entities. Obviously, to us, this is a very big problem. Number one, we all have our vendors. We're comfortable with our vendors. Our vendors know our students. Our students know our teachers, know the vendors' teachers. And it works. It makes sense. The scheduling makes sense. To bring in a new vendor that our schools have never used before, to say the least, is going to be very problematic. That's one issue with this regulation. Another issue with the regulation is that the public entities do not have teachers on staff to provide services for all the additional children that they will now have to service. For example, I can tell you there's approximately 55,000 children in the state of New Jersey that are serviced today through private entity providers, Catapult, TenderTouch, Tree of Knowledge, about 55,000 children. The public entity commissions do not have on staff and will not be able to find teachers to provide services for 55,000 children all of a sudden. In general, there's a shortage of teachers. There's many people that are tuned in that are from other towns, not Lakewood, that are using some of these public entity providers, and they are very dissatisfied with the current services they're receiving, let alone adding on another 55,000 children to service. So basically, this regulation restricting private entity providers is going to hinder the entire program and make it practically impossible to service and to use any of these funds for services. Another restriction that was put on by the state. In the federal guidance and the federal law, EANS money, or for short EANS 1, was allowed to be used for reimbursements. Retroactive reimbursements. Because if a school spent money on barriers, on plexiglass, on sanitation, items to clean the school, they could get reimbursed with this money. Many schools invested a tremendous amount of money, making sure that their schools are COVID compliant, making sure that their schools have the proper social distancing. Some schools that I know of broke down walls to expand the size of their classrooms. A tremendous amount of resources was invested into this. And in many cases, the schools did not have the funds to do this. They took out loans, they went into different areas where they weren't planning on spending certain funds, and they did it. And they were hoping to get reimbursed from the EANS money. The state has placed another regulation which will not allow the schools to use any of the EANS money for reimbursements. For example, if you're a school that spent a lot of money to buy your students tablets for distance learning, for Zoom classes, according to the federal law, you'll be able to get reimbursed. The state imposed regulation, you can no longer get reimbursed. So we've been discussing this with the state on the highest level, and I really mean the highest level. And we've expressed our, I guess you could call it outrage at the circumstance that here we have this tremendous opportunity to provide our students with much needed services, but we're basically not being allowed to for a self-imposed regulation. I think it's important that as we're discussing this whole situation, that we need to mention and thank Assemblyman Gary Scherer, who I can personally testify has put in dozens of hours speaking to people, whether it's in the Department of Education, people in the governor's office. I've spoke to him late at night discussing this. I actually got a call from him last night at 11:30 p.m. He wanted to give me a little bit of an update. We've been back and forth. We're putting in a lot of effort to somehow change these restrictions. We don't know what the end result is going to be. However, I think it's only right that we notify the schools of what's actually happening, what the reality on the ground is. It's exciting when we put out, press releases and webinars. We got $44 million and every school's gonna get it. But really the schools probably, as of right now, may not get it. Hopefully that will be changed. And we'll have siyata d'shmai to be able to be successful. But right now it isn't. Therefore, we don't think it's a good idea for the schools to fill out the application as of today. The application, I'm sure many of you have reviewed the application, have seen the application. It is a very simple application. You just have to check off a couple of boxes. We can go through some of them today if anyone has questions on any specific questions of the application. And it takes probably 90 seconds to fill out. There's no need to fill it out today. We have till May 12th to fill out the application. That gives us a solid 2 weeks of time to see where things take us. So we feel that as of right now, it's best not to fill out the application, definitely to work with your vendors to see what opportunities you could use with these funds for your schools. Many vendors, some of the vendors, I can tell you Catapult for sure, has been putting in lots of time and lots of hours with their schools, knowing that they may not be able to provide the services, but helping the schools create programs with these funds to be able to possibly help them. And then when the time comes, whether it's May 10th, whether it's May 9th, or whether it's tomorrow, if this is resolved, siyata d'shmaya, then we'll fill out the application. But let's wait a little bit till we see where progress is made. That's in regard to the 2 big points that I wanted to make sure to get across to the yeshivas today. Number 1, the vendor issue. Number 2 is the reimbursements. Number 3 is the allocation. Every school received an allocation. Now, we wrote in the letter you received, it said a preliminary allocation. The reason is because the state, and this was a great thing that they did, decided with lots of input from non-public school representatives to make sure that every school got a piece of the pie. So the allocation was based on 3 parts. Number 1 is your per pupil count, how many students are in your school. Number 2 is the COVID impact your school had. Number 3, if you service low-income families. So number 1, every school gets a allocation off the bat for every child you have. Then there's the 3rd COVID impact. In your application is a box to check off. Was your school impacted by COVID? I can't imagine there's a school that was not impacted in some way from COVID. And there's a drop box in the application of different options to check off how you were impacted, whether it's loss of tuition, whether it's extra expenses, whatever it may be. I can't imagine the other way, that every school has at least one of those items that affected them. So you'll be eligible for the 2nd piece of the COVID impact. Low income, almost every school has a population of low income children. You don't have to have a percentage of your school low income. You don't have to have X amount of children that are low income. You have to be servicing low income children, which practically almost every school can check off that box as well. So in all probability, your preliminary allocation is going to be your actual allocation. Just make sure when you fill out the application, you fill out, yes, you had a COVID impact. Yes, you service low-income families. Then you'll get your application. Every box is important. When you fill out the application, you'll notice that there's a box to check off of every one of the services available. If you don't plan on using the money for cleaning supplies, just press no. Then you'll get the next option. You don't have to use the money for every single one of the allowable uses. Only check off the one you have. That is in regard to EANS. What's important to take note is that when the time comes, we'll probably have another webinar to discuss EANS 2, which is the second round of EANS, the second 22 or $23 million, that will be different than this EANS. Will be a little bit different based on the allocations, will be a little bit different on the application. There will be some changes in some regulations, which we do not have yet. The Federal Department of Education did not release the guidelines yet. It's still in the middle of making it. There's a public comment period, which we've submitted comments to. And once that is established, we'll be having another webinar, obviously. But for right now, just to recap, and then we'll take some questions if there are, and we'll move on to the next part of the webinar. There's a lot of money. You've received your allocations. As of today, Monday, April 26th, 29th day of the Omer. Unfortunately, we are not able to use any of our private entity providers to give us any services. That is a very big problem because we know that the public entities will not be able to step up and provide it. Another very big problem is that the state is not allowing for any reimbursements. Therefore, before you fill in your application and lock yourself in to specific items, wait till the deadline, till May 11th if you have to give us time to try as much as we can to change this and then submit your application. You could be working now with your provider to think of ideas. That's a great idea, but don't submit the application until we're able to see it, if we're able to change, if we're not able to change. Hopefully we'll have to see the trial. Are there any questions on this? I'll take the Q&A. Only one question. Okay, if the school did fill out the application, it is what it is. It's fine. What I'm concerned about is that there may be some schools that are going to hear about not being able to use their vendors and may choose to use their services, their money for a different item, not services. Or even in services, if you know that you can't use your vendor, you may opt into different types of services. You may not want to do a summer program. You may not want to do an English second language program. You may want to keep it strictly to tutoring. You may want to keep it strictly to simple things to make it easy for an outside vendor. If you know you have your vendor that you always use that provides you with services, it's much more flexible. Your options are much wider. Therefore, we feel don't fill it out and box yourself in because you can't use your vendor. Let's wait. If you sent it in and you put in everything you wanted, then fine, you did it already. I don't think you're going to lose out if you put in what you wanted. If you submitted and you didn't put in what you want, because of that, you may have lost out. That's why it's important to just let's wait to see what happens. Okay, it seems like that's all the questions. Hopefully, I guess that was very clear then. Yosef, any more questions? No. Someone's raising their hand. I see, but best we can go to the Q&A. I'm working with other organizations. Okay, so like this, number one is we are working with the Catholic Conference and the broader non-public school advisory committee. I cannot answer you, Judah. I can't answer you, Rabbi Rosenbaum. I'm sorry, Rabbi Rosenbaum. I cannot answer you why other organizations are or are not involved in this. I can only tell you what we're doing here in the Aguda, and we have had several conference calls. I can tell you I've had about a half a dozen conference calls with the Catholic Conference and several dioceses throughout the state that this is being affected with. So yes, we are, but I can't answer for every organization. And I think I know which one you're referring to. I cannot answer why or why they are not taking an active role in this. I have no idea. We have reached out to all organizations to express our disappointment, and those that have responded are the ones that we are working with. Okay, I see there's another question over here about allowable uses. Reasonable translation course, anything to social listening, also we have to operate at half capacity. The answer is yes, regarding buses. This is exactly what it means, reasonable transportation cost. If due to COVID, you have to hire or obtain more buses, and that's going to be more costly, yes, you absolutely can use the money from EANS for transportation. You do want to make sure that you're actually providing those extra buses, but absolutely yes. Your next question was, what are the allowable expenses of this year maintaining engineers bus system? So 2 questions. Number 1 is for regarding infrastructure, you cannot use the money for capital improvements. That's just a very simple, basic answer. If you want to start to rewire your building, you can't do that. I give you this, the simple and the litmus test. If the Board of Ed or the state can come and remove the item you bought and take it home with them, then you can buy it. If it's a non-removable item that is part of the structure of your school, you cannot. So a smart board could be taken off the wall and be brought back to the Board of Ed building. Therefore, you could use it for smart boards, absolutely. But to enhance or to upgrade the actual infrastructure, which is considered a capital improvement, that you're not allowed to use the money for. Okay, well, any other more questions besides those? I see 2 more questions. That's that. There's more coming in. I see Mr. Schloss has a question. Any students may be serviced. Mr. Schloss had a very good question. That unlike, let's say, 192 or Title I, where students have to be eligible to receive service, over here, any student can receive services because every student has been impacted by COVID. I can't imagine as a student that hasn't been. So therefore, the money could be used for any students as the legislation reads, to initiate and maintain education and support services. It can be for either one of them. It does not have to be a Title I eligible student or a student that has an IEP or an ISP. Absolutely not. Okay, any more? That's all. So I think we covered all the questions on the Q&A. If you just take off those 2 questions, this way it doesn't pop up. Unless there's one more. Okay, good. Moving along, and I'm waiting to see the participant number drop. But this is crucial for any school that has a student at Jacksonville. One more question pop up. Is it things related? Yeah. Okay. That's an excellent question. Can the school use money for recreation activities? The answer is, I would say yes. I would say yes because Title IV, for example, under Title IV, you could use the money for recreational activities, for athletics, for music, what's called a well-rounded activity, well-rounded education. So I would, based on the Title IV allowable uses, I would say that that's included in support and educational services. That's how the federal government translates it. So therefore, I would say yes. Of course, the state may push back on it a little bit because we see it doing that a little bit. But then again, you have to remember, how are you going to use it for recreational activities? Are you going to hire a music teacher? That music teacher can be employed by you. That music teacher needs to be employed by a state-approved vendor, which is a public entity, or be employed by the state. That may be your challenge, finding the staff. If you want to buy material to provide, extracurricular activities, that may be simpler. And again, the material has to be the kind of material that you can return to the Board of Ed. As an example, there are many schools that have purchased playground equipment with Title IV money, that purchased music room equipment with Title IV money. That can all, I believe, that should be able to fall under the allowable uses of EANS. Mr. Schloss has one more question about transferring my secular staff payroll to Catapult. Mr. Schloss, you cannot use Catapult. So forget about using your staff under Catapult. As of right now, you can't use Catapult. Now, probably you need to ask that theoretically, if we were to be successful with Siyata D'Shmaya and rectify this wrongdoing and allow Catapult to provide services, could Catapult employ some of your teachers? And those teachers will provide support services for Catapult, and they're also an employee of you at different times of the day. Yes, that should not be a problem either. And I will tell you, several states are doing this. This is not just a Schnall creation. This is being implemented in several states where the vendor will hire a school employee that will now become a vendor employee to provide services for the students. Okay, let's move along to Jackson, or in general, Consultation. And again, if you are not a school that's located in Lakewood with Jackson students, or you're a school located in Paramus or Livingston or in Clifton or anywhere else in New Jersey, and you're having issues with your Board of Ed and their consultation, it may be worthwhile to stay on because we're going to discuss a few things. Let's get right to it. Number one, I want to just say a few facts, not theories, not suggestions, but facts of consultation. I want to be able to tell you that these are the law of the land, not guidance that was given by the Department of Education, not suggested practices, but laws that every school district in the country must abide by these laws. Number one, there has to be timely and meaningful consultation. That means a district is not allowed, not that they shouldn't, they're not allowed to make decisions on your services that you want. Now, forget about EANS. We're back to regular consultation for the Title 1, 2, and 3, and 4. No longer EANS discussion. We're done with EANS. Now we're going to the regular yearly Title 1 title consultation that we have every year. The Board of Ed must consult, the local Board of Ed must consult. They cannot make any decisions for you. One of the things that the Board of Ed must discuss with you, and I want to read it from the consultation paper that the state gives out to every Board of Ed, is, I'm sorry, just give me a moment until I find it. So, number 3, there's a checklist that every school receives from their Board of Ed, or they should receive a checklist of all different allowable uses. Number 3 says as follows. Number 4, how, where, and by whom. How, where, and by whom the services will be provided. That means the district must ask and consult with the schools who their service provider will be. And it's a discussion, it's a consultation. It's not that the district tells you, we demand that you only use this vendor and nobody else, and we're not discussing it. They're not allowed to do that. Number 2, law. Consultation means not that we come to consultation, we have a discussion, I express what I like, the Board of Ed says why they don't like it, and that's it, too bad. The wording of the law is that the district and the non-public school must reach agreement on their consultation and must reach agreement in all of these items discussed, including who the vendor will be. So let's give a good example. If I have a school in Lakewood, we'll call it, I call it Orchis Chaim because that's where my children go. So I don't get into trouble with anybody else. So Orchis Chaim has a nice sizable amount of children from Jackson. I assume they do. They go to consultation and they say, the vendor we use is Catapult. We want to continue to use Catapult for our Jackson students as well. Jackson says, no, we have our vendor, Education Services Commission. We don't like Catapult, and we're not going into We're not going into contract with Catapult. Too bad. That's not called reaching agreement. That's not called proper consultation. The school has the right by law to demand that the Board of Ed write a written explanation, not verbal, a written explanation why they are denying the school's request. So consultation, reach agreement, a written explanation why they're denying it. Then the school can go ahead and take that explanation and file a complaint by the state with the ombuds person. Which I'll get to that in a moment. In addition, before consultation is finalized, this is the 4th one, every school signs what's called a non-public affirmation consultation form. This is what it looks like. Every district gives it to you, and you have to sign it. If you did not reach agreement, don't sign the paper. If Jackson, or it could be any district, is not giving you what you asked for, and you do not reach agreement, do not sign the paper. Rather email the district, whoever you had your consultation with, that you disagree and you did not have a proper consultation. Really, what's supposed to be is, hope this is eligible. If it's not, I'll give another one. Not so eligible. But we really want to do a screen sharing, but we had some technical difficulties. But there's supposed to be on every consultation form a box to check off. Non-public officials agree that consultation occurred, or non-public school officials disagree. Don't check agree if you didn't get the vendor you wanted. Check disagree. Unfortunately, Jackson has sent out the consultation form and they already checked off the box of agree. Don't sign on the bottom line because you don't agree, because you didn't get your consultation. You don't agree on the vendor. It is crucial we do this. Another point is, now's the time that all the schools are being contacted by Jackson to get their consultation. If we don't fill out the necessary paperwork to receive the services, you're forfeiting it. And we've been for the past several years working very hard to get Jackson to go into contract with some of these vendors that Lakewood uses, because we see how difficult it is, and we see that children in Jackson are not getting service. And as time goes on, today there are over almost 2,500 children that live in Jackson that attend now yeshivas in Lakewood that are not getting services. Some schools, this is a very high percentage, and it's only going to get greater. If we don't fix this now, it's only going to get worse, and we may not have the opportunity we have now to change it. Now we have an opportunity. There's a board member, C. Herman, a very special person that is putting in a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes, trying to change this. But he keeps on getting met with opposition by the Board of Ed members or administration members telling him, we never hear from the schools. The schools just don't fill out the paperwork. So they don't even ask for consultation. The reason why schools do that, I understand, is because the schools aren't getting services anyway, so what's the point of filling it out? This year we need to fill it out, we want services. Another complaint that we've been hearing from Jackson is that the schools got services. They're happy with their professional development. So we are providing the schools. Of course, we know the reason why schools are getting professional development is because you can't get regular services, so at least you get professional development. If you don't want professional development and you want to get services, Title I tutoring, social workers, mentors, all these services in class, push in, pull out, that you get for your Lakewood students, you need to request those services. They may tell you, we're not going to go to your vendor. Great. You fill out, you did not reach agreement, you did not have consultation, and you file a complaint. If we have this, then we have the ammunition we need to go back to the state and say, look, X amount of schools had consultation. Jackson is refusing to go into contract with any other provider, only their own, and because of that, all of these students in schools are losing out. So just to do a quick wrap up, and I'll take questions. Number one is please fill out the paperwork. Don't forfeit the funds. If you forfeit the funds, you're not going to get anything, and we will not be able to make change. Number two, when you go to consultation, demand your rights. Your right is to ask for the vendor you want. They will tell you no. Demand a written explanation of why you're getting denied in an email from the grants office or whoever it is you're having consultation with. Demand for written explanation. Number three, do not sign the paper if it's checked off that the non-public school agrees. Don't sign the paper if you don't agree to the vendor they're giving you. Ask for another paper, you check off disagrees, and then you sign it. Don't fill out the paper they gave you. Number four, which is critical, is that after consultation, we need the schools to communicate their experience either with myself or with the board member, C. Herman. It is critical that he has the information he needs to be able to make change. C. Herman is there for 1 year, it's a 1 year term. We don't know if he's going to win again next year or not. It's a new election. Right now is an opportunity we have a person on the inside that wants to help us, that's willing to help us, but he needs the necessary information to make this change. Go to the consultation. Don't be intimidated. Ask for what you want to get, what you want to receive. Don't fall for the trap of saying, okay, so I'll take it for professional development. You don't want professional development? Say, no, I want services and I want this vendor. You'll explain why you want that vendor. If they deny it, do not sign this paper. Or ask for another paper that is not already checked off, which is quite a chutzpah. If they checked it off for you, ask for another affirmation paper and check off disagree and then sign it. And then please, we can't ask this any clearer. Communicate with either myself or with Tzvi Herman, the board member, your experience. You communicate. You went to the consultation, you asked for services, you were denied because the district refuses to use the vendor that you want, and they don't have a good reason for it. We know that. Therefore, please communicate this. Happy to take all the questions that are available, and I cannot emphasize how important it is that we do this year and we don't fall for any of the shenanigans and that they're trying to trick us. Who sends a form pre-filled out with a check on it? We see what their intention is, and we can't let this happen because if we have 2,500 children this year, we're going to have 3,000 the next year and 4,000 the next year, and we're going to have a real serious problem. What is this question from Rabbi Cohen? The what? What's the answer? Jackson students are eligible is based on, there's two parts. I'm eligible. I'll get to that in a moment. Rabbi Cohen, I'm going to get to your question in a moment. Should schools email the schools should email the Board of Ed? Excuse me. The Board of Ed, they should email particularly Tzvi Herman. We put Tzvi Herman's email address in the chat box. I believe all schools should have his email. We've sent it out several times in our emails, but schools should send an email to Tzvi Herman and to the Board of Ed. If you'd like, you can copy me on the email as well, so we're able to keep a tally on how many schools did not reach agreement. Is it too late if we already signed? Unfortunately, it is. I would still ask you to send an email to myself and to Tzvi Herman explaining your predicament. You do not want the vendor that district is asking you, and you mistakenly signed the sheet, not realizing that it was already pre-filled out, and you gave it back, which is really unethical. So yes, it's not too late to make a complaint with the Board of Ed member and send it to myself, and we will bring it further. So yes, even if you signed, still tell us what your experience was. The next one, I called John, so this is fun to me. They don't have a vendor, then they send me the affirmation for, I said, what should I do? You should send an email, same question to Mr. Spiegel, same answer. If you have a mistake, send it in. Send an email to myself and to board member Tzvi Herman explaining what happened, that you do not want the vendor they're giving you, and you by mistake filled in the affirmation, not realizing it was already checked off, and it was a mistake, but you do not want the vendor. Okay, I checked with this before, if you give my chance, please to get the BD services. The answer is absolutely not. If you check off disagree, you are not forfeiting your funds. What you're saying is you do not agree the consultation happened, but you're still part of the process. You only forfeit the funds if you don't send in any of the forms or any of the paperwork. Writing disagreement is part of the process, is part of the form. It shouldn't be checked in agree. It should be checked in blank. You should check in disagree. It is not, you are not forfeiting the funds by any means at all. I see the other question about is it too late? The answer is no. Please send Tzvi Herman and myself an email. The only way we will have change is if we have multiple schools, not one or two and not 10. We need 20, 30, 40 schools that are all having this experience, that they want a particular vendor, they want to use it for services, they don't need PD money, they have plenty of PD money come from Title 2A, from Lakewood, they want it for services, but they can't get it because Jackson refuses to go into contract with any of the approved vendors that Lakewood uses. Rabbi Cohen, so here's the answer about. Okay, so what happens when everyone disagrees with Jackson? The Jackson is really put into a position where they probably will have to change their policy and go into contract with other vendors. And Jackson ultimately is not the final decision maker. The final decision maker is the state and buds person. And on top of the state and buds person is the federal Department of Education. Because Title I money is a federal program. So there's multiple levels of a complaint process to go to. So if there's enough people complaining, that's why this is so crucial, that we have everyone on board doing their part to enable us to make the change, is we need a lot. We can't just say one school didn't get services. But then they'll say, that one school got PD, and they're saying that. We come and we show them, we had about a dozen letters from schools that are not getting services, and each one of them was a different excuse. They used it for PD, they forfeited the money, they didn't come to consultation, they didn't want to use anything else. No, we have to be strong. We want our money, we're not forfeiting it, we're demanding our vendor, we want our vendor, and if you deny it, we're demanding a written explanation, and we're going to file a complaint. And we need to do this now while we have a person in the Board of Ed that is willing to help us, that is willing to listen to us. Regarding, Rabbi Cohen, regarding your question about eligible students, so eligible students in Jackson is the same way how eligible students are eligible anywhere else. There's two parts. There are students that, what's the word I'm looking for, that generate the funds, and then there are students that are eligible for funds. Generating funds is based on low income. Eligible for services is based on academics. So you could technically have a very bright, extremely academically successful student. I think that's the best politically correct way to say it. Academically successful student that happens to come from a low-income family that is generating funds that a very affluent, not academically challenged student is using for services. That's the irony of this whole program. That low income generates funds, but doesn't mean that child gets the services. The services go to the children that are academically challenged, no matter how wealthy or not wealthy they are. So if you have students in Jackson that are income eligible, they will produce your funds. Eligibility for services will depend on academics. And that's how it works in every single district. So yes, it may be some schools may have a lot of students from Jackson, but very few of them are income eligible. So your allotment is much smaller. That's very, very possible. It could be the opposite way around as well. You can have many students from Jackson that many of them are income eligible. Not a lot of them are academically eligible. So you have a huge amount of money to provide a lot of services to those few students. Unfortunately, today you can't give them any services because you can't use your vendor because the district refuses to, for no good reason. Hopefully we'll be able to change that. So I think we've discussed transportation. That's a bold question. So let me just, before we get to transportation, which I could talk about, regarding the JAX, regarding consultation, regarding the services, EANS, I believe we covered it all. If there are any more questions, of course, always feel free to reach out to us, agoda.org, or to yherz@agoda.org. But please go to the consultation, know your rights, don't be intimidated, demand what you need to demand, and do not sign those papers that say you agree if you disagree. If you signed it already, please send us an email to myself and to C. Herman. C. Herman's email is therman@jacksonsd.org. THERMAN@Jackson, JACKSONSD.org. So what exactly should the letter from the Jackson BOE say? I'm not sure what that question means. The letter from the Jackson Board of Ed, whoever asked this question of what exactly should the letter from Jackson BOE say, what letter are you referring to? The letter of denial? The letter telling you you have to have consultation? You're getting it in the mail from them directly. You'll see the letter. So I don't know what question you mean. When is Jackson consultation? So the consultations should be happening now. If you did not receive a notification from Jackson, you should reach out to them and say, we have students from Jackson. Are we eligible? Do we have any eligible students from Jackson? When is our consultation? Okay, the letter that we are requesting them to give us after, the letter you're requesting to give them after consultation is why they are denying services. If we had a consultation, I want to use, I'm just going to pick Catapult because they're just big and they're everywhere. So Catapult or Tend to Touch or Tree of Knowledge, whichever one you want to use. And the Jackson Board of Vendors will tell you, no, we don't want to use that vendor. You have a right and you need to ask them, demand from them, a written explanation of why they are denying to go into contract with the vendor you like them to. That's what the letter should be saying. Okay, I think that those much. I think I quite answer this question about low income. Right? Okay. The last question regarding eligible is based on income. Yes, eligible to generate funds is based on income, and then once the money is generated, the students that receive the services is based on academic eligibility. So if you have a school that has 10 boys from Jackson, but every one of those 10 boys are from high income families, you don't have an allocation from Jackson. Even if every one of those boys is academically challenged, you will get no allotment because the money is generated based on income eligibility. Regarding transportation for Jackson, the answer is very simple. It's a work in progress. I can tell you that Tzvi Herman and the Board of Ed of Jackson, I got to give a big shout out to Michelle Richardson from the Transportation Department and the BA, is really putting in a lot of time to figure out ways to make this work. Obviously, you all know the challenges. Jackson is huge, and people that are living all over the place, and a bus cannot run for more than an hour and a half. So if it takes Jackson, it takes a bus to fill up, that's 52 seats, to fill up all these students that are in that particular school. It may take an hour just to go around Jackson to pick up all those students and then drive them to your school. It take another 40 minutes. They can't do that route. Another problem is that not many schools have enough children living in Jackson to fill up a bus. And as we know, there's a shortage on buses and bus drivers. So the Board of Ed is only going to pick up the routes that are most profitable. Unfortunately, as of today, it's growing, and each year there are more and more students. As of today, there's not enough that every single school could get picked up. That's where it stands. I will tell you that there are many conversations taking place with the Board of Ed, with Tzvi Herman, with the business administrator. Even the LSTA is trying to give some advice and consultation, pro bono, by the way, to help out and try to figure out a way how they could maximize how many children are on those buses. But the reality is that most will not have busing next year because of this reason. Well, that's the next question. Why do we want to hire teachers through Jackson Board of Ed? They said I can choose my teachers. Okay, very simple. Because your teachers, number one, have to be licensed teachers in order to be hired. Most schools do not have teachers that have the necessary licensing requirements to be hired by the Board of Ed, number one. So that's the simplest reason. Number two is you have to find out how much they're being paid in the Board of Ed for those kind of services. And if the Board of Ed will provide those services, that's technically right. If you can find a teacher that's in your school that has all of the proper licensing requirements to be hired by the Board of Ed, and the Board of Ed is willing to hire her, and her compensation is equal, go for it. Unfortunately, that reality doesn't exist in the vast majority of our schools. Okay, we both answered about 25 questions, which is pretty good. I see there's no more questions. I just can't re-emphasize and impress upon everybody how important this is to, number one, go through the process, don't forfeit the money, fill out the paperwork, demand services, demand your vendor, and please communicate all of this with myself and with Herman to ensure that we're getting the information we need in order to fight this. If we don't have it, we can't fix it. And we're going to come back in 5 years from now when you're going to have schools that literally 50% of their student population is from Jackson, and they're getting no services because they can't use that vendor that Jackson provides. And Chas v'sholom, we should say it's too late. This is the time to do it. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Question: why can't Jackson collaborate? Near Kent can fill 52 seats and a lot of time in Jackson and Lakewood. Near course, the answer is legalities. That's the answer, because Jackson is a district and Lakewood is a district, and generally districts don't commingle their busing for legal reasons. They have to go into contracts to do that, and that is one of the ideas that is being discussed. The reason why it's not just a given is because of legal contracting and shared, there's a word for it, shared something, but shared services agreement. Thank you. A shared services agreement, so there's a possibility, but again, it's not just a given. It has to be worked out together, and contracts have to be made. Legal experts have to go through it, and it definitely is being discussed. That is for sure. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. This is being recorded in case you'd like us to send you a recording and to pass on to other schools that you feel we're not on that may benefit from this. And please help us be able to help all of us. Thank you.